And we're live here, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. What's up, guys? Nick Script, P2W Fantasy Podcast, improv episode talking about every game from week 9 and a player spotlight from each team in that matchup. Before we get into that, as always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group, which is a branch of Fantasy Points. Go check out fantasypoints.com. One-stop shop, fantasypoints.com for everything fantasy you're looking for. Articles, research, data, projections, rankings, Discord, everything's right there. Use the promo code P2W22 for a discount. Sign up today. I work with them. I'm an analyst for their site, their live streams. I'm on their website every single day. So again, well worth it. Let's kick things off. Stick with me here.
To win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win.
So a lot to talk about today. Have all the slates of games for Sunday, and I want to highlight one player spotlight from each team in that matchup. So we'll kick things off with the Packers versus the Lions. So on I think I got my notes mixed up. All right. On the Packers side here, I want to talk about Romeo Doubs versus Detroit. Aaron Rodgers made these comments prior to week 8, basically saying that the wide receiver group needed to step up, be more consistent, especially the young guys. A lot of people thought he was talking about Romeo Doubs, who caught 0 of his 4 targets in week 7. Week 8 rolls around, though. It's a tough Buffalo matchup. The rookie caught 4 of 7 targets for 62 receiving yards and a touchdown. Third week of the season, above 13 fantasy points, and his second best outing for fantasy on the year. Christian Watson left the game with a concussion. Allen Lazard has been limited this week. So the Detroit Lions, it's a fantasy-friendly matchup. 5th most points per game given up to wide receivers for fantasy. 6th most passing yards per game. So, again, soft matchup. We got some guys banged up. He just had a good week. I like Romeo Doubs in this matchup. So, again, due to the matchup, due to his bounce-back performance, gaining some more trust from Rodgers, I feel like he's a guy that should be in your lineups. I feel like Rodgers is due for a good game in this one as well. On the other side of the ball, I want to talk briefly about my guy, Jared Goff. I feel like one of the only guys out there that still likes Jared Goff. But right now, I talked about him as a stream this morning in a video that I posted on Twitter. He was right around 50% rostered in sleeper redraft leagues. I feel like he's a streamer this week. Green Bay is a tougher matchup, but Goff is averaging 17-ish fantasy points on the year. He's shown some upside. He's had 2 games passing for 4 touchdowns in an individual game, 2 games over 320 passing yards, and 2 games above 26 fantasy points. So, again, Jared Goff to me is a stream this week just based off of his performances. Big matchup there in the same division. We'll talk about a team also in that division, my Chicago Bears playing Miami. I kind of wish I was actually at this game going to it because for once there's decent weather in Chicago. But again, highlighting 2 guys, one from each team. The Dolphins right now 5-3. The Bears are 3-5. Raheem Mostert I want to talk about. So Tony Pollard just ran for 131 yards and 3 touchdowns against the Bears. It was a call of mine from last week. Ramondre Stevenson this season scored a touchdown. He had 8 catches versus the Bears. Brian Robinson scored and combined with Gibson for 95 rushing yards. Dalvin Cook, 94 and 2 touchdowns. 146 rushing yards for Saquon. 80 rushing yards and a touchdown for Pierce. Chicago just lost Roquan Smith at the linebacker position. So it's such a juicy matchup for running backs. And I like Raheem Mostert to have a better day this week. You know, I whiffed on calling him a start last week, but I truly believe he is one for this week. We know that Jeff Wilson Jr. is now in Miami. He's reunited with both Mike McDaniels and Raheem Mostert, who he was in a shared room with back in San Francisco. But Mostert had a season-high 20.9 fantasy points week 7, where he had a receiving touchdown and 4 receptions and 79 rushing yards. He rushed for 113 yards and a touchdown week 5. So we know he does have the upside on the ground. It's a really, really good matchup for running backs. It just has been all season. So you just do the math. It's a team giving up a ton of running back fantasy points. They just lost a defensive piece in their system. It's a favorable game script, I feel like. I think, Justin Fields has been playing great the last few games, but the matchup's really not in the sense of Tua's going to have to air it out the entire game. So I do like Raheem Mostert in this specific matchup. On the other side of the ball, we have to talk about Justin Fields. So a rough first 4 weeks for Fields. He posted QB 23, QB 27, QB 31, and QB 26 weeks. Those first 4 games, he only averaged 16.75 passing attempts, so he really wasn't throwing the ball a lot. He had a ratio of 2 to 4 touchdowns and interceptions. He had a completion percentage of 50% or lower in 3 out of 4 of those games. And then there was this big shift weeks 5 through 8. He finished those weeks as the QB 13, the QB 8, the QB 5, and the QB 5. Back-to-back weeks as the overall QB 5 in fantasy. So during that weeks 5 through 8 stretch, he's been the QB 2 overall. There's been improvements for Fields. That touchdown to interception ratio, it was 2 to 4. Now it's 5 to 2 these last 4 games. 2 out of 4 of these games, he's had a completion percentage above 71%. So again, much better than the 50% or lower that he had in the beginning of the season. And also a big change, 3 out of 4 of these games, he's had 60-plus rushing yards. And 50% of those games, he's had 82-plus rushing yards. So I feel like this playbook is shifted, and it's way more geared towards what Fields does well, and that's why he's been playing good. The Dolphins are number 7 in points per game given up to quarterbacks, so Justin Fields continues to be a good fantasy play. There's been some guys like Lamar Jackson earlier this season. He rushed for 119 yards on the ground versus Miami. So I'm not going to say Justin Fields can do that or mirror that, or he is Lamar Jackson, but they struggle with a running quarterback earlier this season. So key thing that happened with Chicago, they signed Chase Claypool. It's another weapon. You can say they overpaid. It was a good pay regardless. He's a player with big downfield catching ability and touchdown upside. What his involvement will be right away versus Miami, I'm not entirely sure, but I still think Fields, just based off of what he's done the last couple of weeks, is a good play. So let's shift over to the next game on the slate. Just trying to run through all these, one player from each team. I can talk about the entire matchup, but we'd be here for like 2 hours. So let's talk about the Bills versus the Jets. I have to mention, and everybody likes the guy, but I have to mention Stephon Diggs. I love Diggs. I pre-ranked him as number 3 for the wide receiver position. At some point this year, somebody mentioned it recently. I said, man, two seasons. I think last season I pre-ranked him number 1, and I said maybe I was just a year early on Stephon Diggs, who right now is the wide receiver 2 behind Tyreek Hill in total points. But Tyreek Hill's played 8 games and Stephon Diggs only 7. So that kind of tells you how great of a season he's had for fantasy so far. Hopkins is averaging more fantasy points per game, but it's due to his sample size. He's only played 2 games. Stephon Diggs is averaging 24.8 fantasy points per game. Excellent. Number 3 in receptions, number 2 in receiving yards for wide receivers. 109.1 receiving yards per game is great. Number 1 in total touchdowns with 7. That's great. I want to mention Diggs here because it seems like Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are the only consistent pieces in this offense. We see up and down days of Devin Singletary and Gabriel Davis. Isaiah McKenzie will pop up from time to time. Dawson Knox. But those guys have not had this, solid consistency due to their work that they get on a weekly basis. But we know that Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, we can count on them week in and week out every single week. They just added Nyheim Hines. We'll see what his role is like, but that even more complicates everybody else in the system, I feel like, outside of Stephon Diggs. Other side of the ball, I want to mention Tyler Conklin. Points per game given up. Buffalo gives up the 4th least to quarterbacks, the 4th least to running backs, the 12th least to wide receivers, and the 11th least to tight ends. So on paper, across the board, they are the most friendly to tight ends. Not very friendly, but the most friendly to tight ends. But it's just a tough matchup in general for the Jets and Zach Wilson. Not super fantasy friendly for most pieces that come against the Buffalo defense. Tyler Conklin, though, 16 targets across his last 2 games played. Last week, he exploded for 25.9 fantasy points. It was guided by 2 receiving touchdowns. Zach Wilson is coming off of a 3-interception week, and now he plays arguably the toughest defense in the NFL. So I don't feel like he's going to be super successful down the field, stretching the field, making these big plays. So maybe the shorter and intermediate options, which Tyler Conklin can be, is going to be the best for Zach Wilson. So again, Conklin, he has the touchdown upside, but he's also been getting some decent targets. I feel like he could be almost that safety valve for Zach Wilson, who probably is going to struggle in this game, in all honesty. Let's get the next game on the slate. We'll go Colts-Patriots. I think we're just skipping around here. So I want to focus on Michael Pittman Jr. Can he get back on track? That's going to be the big question here because, he scored 12.3 fantasy points last week. Not terrible, but we've had these high expectations for Pittman this year. Week 1, he had 27.1 fantasy points. Week 6, he had 26.4. That's what we have wanted out of him. That's what we have expected him, especially those of us that have projected him as a top 12, maybe, top 15 option coming into the season. Sam Ehlinger, his first start was last week. Michael Pittman Jr. did see 9 targets in that game. So I feel like that's the one really promising thing about guys like Michael Pittman Jr. is that, Deontay Johnson kind of reminds me of this sort of situation of a guy that's getting a ton of volume. He just needs to produce at a higher rate for fantasy. But despite him missing a game, Michael Pittman Jr., number 8 for the wide receiver position in targets with 70. So he's averaging 10 targets a game. Solid. He's had 2 games above 120 receiving yards, only 1 touchdown on the year, though. So another mark we hope changes. Not the easiest of matchups, but I'm hoping that this is a game he gets back on track. Sam Ehlinger's second start at the quarterback position. He did see 9 targets last week. What I'm going to be looking for is, can we finally see a shift in Michael Pittman being a bit more at the expectation level versus like just okay is more of a flex play. On the other side of the ball, I have to highlight the overall running back 7 on the year, Ramondre Stevenson. He's averaging 16.7 fantasy points and has been above that 4 straight weeks now. Even with the return of Damian Harris the last 2 games, Ramondre has had 77% and 63% of the snaps, and then 19 and 23 touches. So still on the field a ton, still getting a ton of work. Damian Harris, I think, is questionable right now too. So there's a chance that maybe he doesn't even play in this game. But the biggest factor in Ramondre Stevenson's rise for PPR leagues has been the passing work. He's been great in that department. 15 targets the last 2 games combined. He's caught all of them. That's great. That's what you want in PPR leagues out of your running back, a guy that's getting a ton of work on the ground and has that upside to get the passing work. Last game, for example, he had 71 on the ground and 72 through the air. So that boosts his floor. It raises his ceiling. I know that's like 2 generic things to say, but it's very true when it comes to pass catching running backs. In terms of points per game given up, the Colts are one of the tougher matchups for wide receivers, but a top 10 matchup for running backs. Love Ramondre Stevenson this week. Chargers and Falcons. So Chargers and Falcons. Let's step back and look at the situation for the Chargers right now. So Mike Williams out of the mix. I think he's going to be out another few weeks. Keenan Allen, we were expecting to use that bye week to be closer to 100% than 50%. He had a setback. It's not looking great. I posed the question, is Keenan Allen going to be more DeAndre Hopkins, meaning I was gone for a different reason, but I was gone. I came back. Now I'm the man. Or is it going to be Michael Thomas? I've been gone and now I'm done. I truly hope it's not more Michael Thomas. I hope to see Keenan Allen. But 2 guys get a huge boost in this game. It's Joshua Palmer, who I think is a great flex play this week, and it's Gerald Everett, who I want to highlight here. So Everett has had 5 weeks of 6+ targets. He had a season high of 10 targets week 2, 16 total across the last 2 weeks played. So the potential for him to see 7 to 10 targets in this game, knowing that they're missing these guys and knowing that he's had some pretty good targets this season, is there. He's had 3 weeks under 8 fantasy points, but he's also had 3 weeks above 13. I like Everett to have one of those better days in week 9 against the Falcons, who are giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. He's only 41% started on Sleeper the last time I checked. So I feel like that number is going to change and should change drastically. Only 2 touchdowns on the year, but he's had 8 red zone targets, which is 4th for tight ends. It's a small sign that the touchdowns are going to come. So I like Gerald Everett this week. And I might say, like, hot take, anytime touchdown scorer, bet on Gerald Everett. Other side of the ball, Marcus Mariota, currently a top 10 overall quarterback, just like we expected. Averaging 16.91 fantasy points per game with 4 weeks above this. Passing volume, it's not always there for Mariota. That's been one thing that's kind of affected this offense, but they're winning games right now. The Falcons are 4-4, Chargers 4-3. 9 targets for Pitts last week was due to volume. So that's something to keep an eye on and hope for in this game. Pitts took 5 of those for 80 yards and scored a touchdown. Before this Justin Herbert matchup, Marcus Mariota threw for a season high in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Mariota, 253 through the air, 3 touchdowns. So if this sticks, if this is more of what's going to come in week 9, then we are more comfortable with Pitts in London in our lineups. But again, highlighting Marcus Mariota, had a season high through the air this past week. Next matchup, we'll go to the Vikings versus the Commanders. So the Vikings 6-1, Commanders 4-4. Dalvin Cook, can he stay hot? A lot of echoes early on in the fantasy world about Dalvin Cook being this big sell candidate. But I made a video after week 2 saying the opposite. I said Dalvin Cook for redraft's a big buy right now. Weeks 5 through 8, keep in mind he had a bye week, week 7. Dalvin is averaging 22.2 fantasy points, with 2 of those 3 games being above that mark. He just had a season high in rushing yards with 111 on the year, and also a season high of 5 receptions against the Cardinals last week. So he has some momentum, not just on the ground, but also through the air a bit, which is good. Commanders are not the easiest of matchups, but 25 touches last week is the volume he could be seeing with this momentum and is great for the fantasy world. So looking for Dalvin Cook to stay hot against the Commanders. Other side of the ball, Antonio Gibson, want to talk about him. After seeing 47% of the snaps in back-to-back weeks, Brian Robinson only saw 25% of the snaps in week 8. He dipped to 8 carries after having 17 and 20 the 2 games prior. Antonio Gibson saw 36% of the snaps last week, 14 touches, and scored his 2nd receiving touchdown in a row. So back-to-back weeks, catching a pass for a touchdown. J.D. McKissick was at 36% of the snaps last week, plus 5 touches, but is now out of the mix. So Gibson last week was highly efficient for fantasy versus what his touches were. He had back-to-back solid fantasy weeks of over 16 fantasy points. So my big question here is does he grab that job back? It looks like Brian Robinson's roll snap percentages have start to go down a bit. Gibson's just been playing better. It'll be interesting to see though with J.D. McKissick out how that dynamic is. Is he, is Brian Robinson still going to take the first and second down snaps, and then Gibson's the third down guy, and then he takes some of the work? But I truly think Antonio Gibson is in a good spot to win that job back, or at least win the snaps back when it comes to the Commanders' backfield, just because he's been more efficient the last 2 weeks. Next, we got the 2-6 Panthers versus the 4-4 Bengals. So DJ Moore, week 7, DJ scored a season high 19.6 fantasy points. Then in week 8, he had a new season high with 27.5 fantasy points. Both of these games with PJ Walker. Did PJ Walker unleash DJ Moore? It looks like it, just strictly based off of fantasy points. So 21 targets are across these last 2 games. It helps, right? Feed your best wide receiver. It's as simple as that. The personnel, has changed, obviously, with Christian McCaffrey, now with the 49ers, Robbie Anderson, now with the Cardinals. But still, feed your best wide receiver. It just makes sense. And that's what PJ Walker has been doing. Back-to-back weeks with a touchdown. We saw what we know DJ Moore for last week, and that's receiving yard upside. He had 152 through the air. So DJ Moore, can he continue with his PJ Walker connection forward. And if Baker comes back, I hope he's just seeing like, hey, throw the ball to your best wide receiver. Good things happen. It just makes sense. Other side of the ball, I want to talk about Tyler Boyd. So another player I listed as a trade target in my recent video that came out this week for redraft because he had just a 12.8 fantasy week against the Browns, and many people had higher expectations with Jamar Chase out. The bigger picture in that game, the Bengals only had 229 total yards, which was the lowest of the season for them. So it's not like it was just his individual like down or like average mediocre week. They weren't great. In all honesty, he did end up scoring his last game, his 4th touchdown of the season. His career high is 7 in 2018. He's had 5, 4, and 5 the last years dating back. So he has true potential to beat what he's done the last 3 years and maybe even beats his career high in touchdowns. But I was asked recently on a podcast, it was the midweek mailbag for fantasy points, who is going to be the next man up in the Bengals offense. In somebody asked, is it going to be Mike Williams, a different Mike Williams, or Mike Thomas? I mean, Mike Thomas. And I said, no, it's not going to be a new guy. It's going to be the other guys just getting a bump. So to me, with Jamar Chase out of the mix, who gets a bump? Tyler Boyd and Hayden Hurst. These are guys that have seen some pretty decent targets through the year, but now they have a higher ceiling for those targets. Boyd, number 1 in slot snaps in the NFL. He's quietly the wide receiver 15 right now overall with 2 games above 20 fantasy points. Carolina's a top 12 matchup in points per game given up to the wide receiver position. The Bengals will be looking for a comeback W, and I wouldn't be shocked if Tyler Boyd had 10 targets in this game. Next game on the slate, as we're clicking around here, we have the Raiders versus the Jaguars. So the Raiders right now 2-5, Jaguars 2-6. Josh Jacobs, you got to talk about Jacobs. A lot of people didn't expect him to have the season he's having. He's currently I believe he's a top 10 running back. He's averaging 20.1 fantasy points per game with weeks 4, 5, and 7. He had a bye week 6. He had 3 games over 30 fantasy points. So Jacobs has been a guy who's been top 10 at the position, and not just top 10, but performing at a very high level for fantasy. Again, 3 weeks that he played in a row, he was going over 30 fantasy points. Not a lot of guys in the league are doing that. When the passing game has not looked consistent, Josh Jacobs has been a solid fantasy option. So he's one of the more comfortable pieces, in all honesty, in that Raiders offense. 4 games of 19-plus carries with a high of 28. Weeks 3 through 5, he had 5 catches in all of those games. So he's getting some good work, and the Jaguars are 8th in fantasy points per game given up to running backs. Other side of the ball, I want to highlight Trevor Lawrence, QB 10 overall this season. He's averaged 16.19 fantasy points. He's been above this mark 4 times this season, 2 weeks above 24 fantasy points. So I was kind of a Lawrence hater last year, but I'm giving this guy credit for the steps he's taken forward, specifically in the fantasy world. So Lawrence is 2 passing touchdowns away from the 12 total that he had his rookie season, over double the amount of games that he's already played. So 2 away from what he did all of last year. That's great. It's a good step forward. Throwing the ball at a good rate with 277 attempts, which is the 6th most for quarterbacks. He's top 12 in passing yards. Number 4 in air yards, meaning he's actually looking for the bigger plays. Glimpses of upside this season. Week 3, he had 3 passing touchdowns versus the Chargers. Week 6, he rushed for 2 touchdowns on the ground. He completed 20 out of 22 passes versus the Colts. And then in week 7 versus the Giants, he had 310 passing yards. So you see these little glimpses of upside. That's good signs moving forward. Now in week 9, he faces the Raiders. They give up the most points per game to the quarterback position and the 8th most passing yards per game. Dalton last week threw for 229 and 2 touchdowns. Mills the week prior had 302 and 2 touchdowns. Mahomes, we're not comparing him to Mahomes to those guys, but he had a 4 touchdown day versus the Raiders. It's a really good matchup for Trevor Lawrence, and I like him as a guy that, if you're juggling people, is in lineups. He was one of my starts of the week. Also, big dynasty implications for Trevor Lawrence getting Calvin Ridley next year. That is huge. Shift to the next game, which I believe Seahawks Cardinals, and these guys have already faced each other once this season. Wasn't the greatest of games though, for the Seahawks specifically, but the Seahawks are 5-3. The Cardinals are 3-5. Love what Geno Smith is doing this season. Love the quote. They all wrote me off. I didn't write back, something like that. Like that's fucking inspiring. Looking at the Seahawks, I want to talk about Tyler Lockett though. Everybody loves DK Metcalf. Everybody's talking about how good Geno Smith's been. Everyone loves Kenneth Walker. Showed Tyler Lockett some love this season. He is the wide receiver 12 on the season. He's averaged 14.1 fantasy points. He's been above that 4 times, aka he should be in your lineups every single week. So I feel like we're giving all these other guys love, but Tyler Lockett's been very good this season. He had a down week last time versus Arizona, but that game, it wasn't close. I think it was like 19-9. The Seahawks didn't have to win through the air in that specific game, specific week. The upside there with Tyler Lockett is that he's top 12 in air yards, and he's number 5 for wide receivers and deep targets with 14. So he has that opportunity on a weekly basis to offer some big plays. And he's been a guy, again, that should be in your lineups. Other side of the ball, Connor is listed as a game time call right now. Eno Benjamin, want to talk about him. Last week, Darrell Williams returned to action, taking up 27% of the snaps. Eno led the team with 74% of the snaps versus the Vikings. Down game, but the game prior, he had a huge 23.3 fantasy point week. He rushed for 92 yards and had a touchdown. He caught 4 passes versus the Saints. When it comes to Eno, I feel like there's some safety to his floor just because he's getting some good work in the passing department. 12 targets the last 2 games with DeAndre Hopkins being back. So it's not like he was getting some passing work. Now their alpha is back and now he's not. It's the opposite. He continues to get some work. So Seattle is giving up the 9th most points per game to running backs on the year for fantasy. I mentioned the Cardinals not competing last time, which kind of changed the upside of the other pieces in this the Seattle offense. But I expect this to be a much better game in Week 9. I think we just got a couple games left. Still speaking English. There you go. Prime example. When you speak by yourself so long and you ramble, words get jumbled sometimes, and fake Chicago accents somehow continue to come out. But next on the list, the Rams 3-4 versus the Buccaneers 3-5. What a shitty way to start for both of these teams. They both had really high expectations coming into the year. 3-4, 3-5 was not what they expected. I want to talk about for the Rams, Tyler Higbee. Cooper Kupp was limited on Thursday with an ankle issue, but is listed as likely to play. So he still should be out there. If he's out there, you have to expect he's still going to get a ton of work. But the Buccaneers are number 5 in points allowed to tight ends for fantasy on the year, which is much more friendly than the points per game allowed to running backs and wide receivers from the Buccaneers. 2 down weeks in a row for Tyler Higbee, but through the first 5 weeks, Higbee was the tight end 6 overall for fantasy. He averaged 12.4 fantasy points per game. He's number 4 in targets for tight ends with 56. That's 8 per game. Solid. Top 10 in receiving yards after the catch. He's number 5 for tight ends, so that shows some upside there. One odd thing about Tyler Higbee, 0 receiving touchdowns on the year. So you're hoping that's something that changes, but it's a good tight end matchup in comparison to running backs and wide receivers. Kupp's been banged up. I like Tyler Higbee in this matchup. Other side of the ball, Chris Godwin, who I mentioned in that redraft trade target video as somebody that you should be looking at before he has an explosion of a game. Because if we look down the list of straight PPR fantasy points, 12.9, 12.3, 15.5, 11.5, 13.5. Those are okay weeks, but it's nothing that you're gloating about it. You're not super excited to have him in your lineup right now based off of those scores. But digging deeper, which a lot of people don't do, is that he's had a lot of weeks in a row now with solid targets. 10, 6, 12, 13, 11. So at least 10 targets in 4 out of 5 of his last games played. Week 6, he had 95 receiving yards. So that was a good mark. Maybe we can have more of those days. But when the volume is as consistent as it's been for Chris Godwin, the production is going to come as he continues to get further and further away from that ACL injury. So the production is going to come. Again, I feel like he's a redraft trade target because he hasn't had that like 20-point fantasy week in a long time, but he's getting a ton of volume from Tom Brady. I think we got a few matchups left to go. Might just be one, actually. One left on the slot here. The Titans versus the Chiefs. That is the night game, the Sunday night game. I struggle making it to that game just because you drink sodas all day and watch football and eat shitty food, and the night game just becomes hard to actually make. But the Titans are 5-2. The Chiefs are 5-2. Two teams that are doing well this season. So Tannehill was limited on Friday. The status is up in the air. Malik Willis might be in line for his second career start. He only threw the ball 10 times last game, though, and one of those attempts led to an interception. Have to focus on Derrick Henry. So season-high rushing attempts with 32 in that game last week. I hit this player prop on the live show for Fantasy Points with my buddy Major. I think the over-under was at 28, I think. And I said I wouldn't be surprised if he's over 30. He was. This resulted in a season-high 219 rushing yards, which I feel like we underreacted to Derrick Henry rushing for fucking 219 rushing yards. It's insane. This is the fourth consecutive game for Derrick Henry over 100 yards rushing, 35.8 fantasy points, which marks his fourth game over 23 fantasy points. So obviously having a good year. I kind of whiffed. I didn't say to fade Derrick Henry, but I was uncomfortable where he was being drafted in that first round. But got to give the guy credit just because he's getting it done on the ground with a ton of volume. Nothing is changing for him. So he did have a rest day on Thursday, and he probably needed it because he's going to have to put the team on his back on Sunday. And again, should see probably 30 carries for the third consecutive week in a row. Other side of the ball, I just want to mention Kadarius Toney. I'm going to make this short when it comes to him, but I'm just curious to see what his involvement is going to be in this offense. Is he going to see 5% of the snaps? Is he going to see 15, 50, 70? We're not exactly sure, which makes it uncomfortable to play him because he just got there not long ago. But the Chiefs, they sent a third-round pick and a 2023 sixth-round pick. There was an investment made there. You do not make that move if you don't, expect him to be a part of this offense. So it's not like they got Kadarius Toney for the low. They spent to go get him. So they plan on having him as a piece in this offense. We know what he can do with the ball in his hands. Andy Reid is mentioned that he's healthy right now. We've seen some clips that he is healthy. We just don't know where he is at when it comes to knowing the playbook and getting connected with Patrick Mahomes. But definitely a guy everybody should have their eye on, especially seeing that they went out and got him. The Ravens and the Saints, that would be the night game. Not going to talk about that one because I feel like on Monday, not the night game, the Monday night game. I feel like I'll do some sort of content when it comes to that one specifically. Got guys in the comment. Daniel Twong saying hello. Toronto Dave, my guy. What is up? Thank you guys for hearing me rant. I know I kind of slurred some words there and started speaking different languages, but it's tough to speak by yourself fast with a lot of information for over 30 minutes straight. So hopefully you guys got something out of this podcast. If you're not following me on Twitter, follow me there at P2W Fantasy. If you scroll through my feed, you'll see a ton of content, different forms of it throughout the week. I'm just out here fucking grinding, man. So enjoy your Friday night and good luck this weekend.